Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the LitRPG podcast. I'm Ramon Mejia, here to bring you the latest LitRPG news, reviews, and author interviews. This week I have 7 new reviews for you folks at home, and that's going to include Battleborne book number 2, Wrack and Ruin, The Wild Wild West, which is the 12th book in the Good Guys series, also Warcore book number 1, Expansion Pack, which is a rogue dungeon anthology, also Defiance of the Fall book number 2, also Enter the System, a new story from the author of Light Online. And last but not least is Dungeon House, which is going to be an online manga. So that'll be sharing with you. Before we get into that, though, of course, we're going to go into some LitRPG news. And in LitRPG news, we're going to start off with a nice little deal here. Dave Wilmarth let us know that Shadow Sun book number 1 is on Amazon Prime until November the 11th. In addition to that, what I forgot to add to the show notes was that Jonathan Brooks is first book in a number of his actual series. He does a lot of Dungeon Core novel writing. He has put them on sale from today, which is August the 27th, to the 30th. So they're all going to be actually on sale for free. So if you've been thinking about checking out Dungeon Core stories, Jonathan Brooks is a great place to get some good stuff, and it's free. So definitely go check it out. I would actually go to his Amazon page where you can actually see the prices for everything that he's putting out there. So there you go. In other LitRPG news, we also have a reminder that the Kickstarter project that Tao Wong is doing for a graphic novel for the System Apocalypse series is ending in a few days. The project is fully funded. It's already reached its goal of, not that much money, but it's all those nice reward tiers for your participation and for your contributions are still available. So definitely go check it out. You can get some nice little rewards if you just, back a project that's already guaranteed to be funded and produced, so you're not really risking anything. But again, we only have a couple days left before this particular project ends. Moving on to a different Kickstarter project for a different graphic novel. This one's actually going to be written by Pirate Abba, who is the author of the Wandering Inn series, highly popular Gamelit LitRPG story. This is actually being produced by a different company. But it is set in this universe, and again, the story is written by Pirate Abba, who's the author of this, the Inverse universe, which is what they're calling it. It hasn't really actually been up that long or there. It has about 2 weeks left. It has already reached over $38,000 in funding. It was looking for 20, so it reached full funding and then some, almost double of what they're looking for. And there's some nice little rewards there as well, including a backlog catalog of all the comic producers' work, signed stuff, audiobooks. Go check it out. Plenty of nice little rewards for this project as well. Okay, on to stuff that is out now, stuff that is out. Haven't had a chance to review it, but it is out for you to know about and to read or not. That includes Reincarnation Trials, the System of Salvation book number 1. This short story in the System Apocalypse series by Tao Wong called Questing for Titles is out as well. Blessed Time is out for you to enjoy. The second book in the Heartfire Healer series, which is a Viridian Gate online side series, is out for you to read. Alpha Rome book number 2. Now just a reminder, this is actually a redone series. The first book of the series came out quite a long time ago originally, but there were some translation issues for some people, and so it was retranslated, republished more recently, and this is the second book in the series, and this is completely new. Nobody's read this before, at least in the United States or in English. So if you like book 1 of the series, book number 2 is out. It's very action-y kind of RPG system. Also out is Neverstone, A Liberty Adventure, The Mad Elf book number 1. Also Captains and Cannons book number 2, The Crew. In addition to that, there's going to be Towers of Achalia, volume 4 in the series there. Also the Dragonheart series, popular Wuxia LitRPG series, book 12 is out for you to enjoy today. Also out is the third book in the series called Main Character Hides His Strength. I honestly wouldn't have recognized that this book is part of the series from the cover art. The first book in the series has the main character in like a dark background, and it's very unique and very almost iconic, very good stuff. This cover art, while it may very well reflect it in the story, it gets harder to match with it because also the text doesn't quite match from the cover art. But still, if you like the series, Main Character Hides His Strength, this is the third book in the series for you to enjoy. Also out is a Dungeon Core story from Jonathan Smith. It's called Dungeon Core Online. Yeah, Dungeon Core Online. There you go. And as a farmer and a fire-breathing chicken. So can't say much more than that. Also out is the fifth book in the Kingmaker saga, The Shadow Labyrinth. The third book in the comedy LitRPG adventure. This trilogy is broken. That's what it's called. It's called This Guild is Batty. So there you go. The seventh book in the Civ CEO series, which is a popular civilization building-esque kind of LitRPG story, out for you to enjoy. Also extra credit. So there we go. All kinds of new stuff that's out for you to read. There are also some new audiobooks for you to enjoy, though. That is going to include Watcher's Repose, Life in Exile, book number 4. Heavenly Throne, book number 5 is out as an audiobook. The Mad Elf, which is, again, we saw the book 1 as an ebook. Audiobook is out at the same time. Lichbane, Goblin Summoner, book number 2 is out. Also, The Rise of the Deathstalkers to Make Gods, book number 1. Origin Land of the Elementals, book number 3 is out as an audiobook. The 10th book in the System Apocalypse series, called Broken Council, is out as an audiobook. Underverse, book number 4 is out as an audiobook. Blessed Time, again, ebook and audiobook out at the same time. The 6th book in the Monster, Maces, and Magic series, called Date, is out, as is the 3rd book in the The Bodies Dungeon series, called Bio Dungeon Hemostasis. Remember, this is that collaborative project between two very well-known Dungeon Core authors, Jonathan Brooks and Jeffrey Falcon-Logue, where they have the Dungeon Core set in the body. So you're getting these this weird mini-verse kind of system of where the Dungeon Core is facing off against biological entities and developing his own kind of dungeon monsters and traps and everything else. It's very much more biological, very interesting, also very different. I thought book one was interesting, so go check it out if you're interested. Dungeon Core story that's a little bit different. The first book in the Dungeon of Story series is out as an audiobook. Also, Overtaken Online, book number 1 is out as an audiobook. And Factory of the Gods, The Wastes of Kildora, audiobook for you. Okay, on to stuff that is out now, upcoming in the near future, rather. That's going to include, this is just me reading a list of stuff. So if you want to skip ahead, great. But there are, again, some shifts and some pre-order stuff here. So if you're interested in that, this is one of those interesting weird release schedules. The Dungeon Core Stories book number 2 out on August 31st, while the first book is out as an audiobook. So interesting there. Also out on September the 1st is going to be the 4th book in the Hapless Dungeon Fairy book series by Jonathan Brooks again. It'll be out on September the 1st. The System Apocalypse book number 11 will be out on September the 1st as well. September the 2nd, it'll be Immortal, Titans Online book number 2. September the 2nd, it'll be True Calling, Original Enchantment. On September the 3rd, it'll be Level Up Kaiju. On September the 6th, it'll be a new, I want to say side series. This is set in the same New Era Online universe, apparently. But it is with a different character, potentially, by Shimmer Kuznets, same author of that series, called Biomancer. So it's Biomancer book number 1. It'll be out on September the 6th. The second book in the Frostwood series will be out on September the 7th. He Who Fights with Monsters book number 3 will be out on September the 7th as well. September the 8th will have us reading Arcana Unlocked book number 3. On September the 11th, it'll be The Bad Guys book number 7, called Back to One. On September the 14th, it'll be Jeff the Game Master book number 2. On September the 14th, this is new to the list, Cinnamon Bun Volume 3. This is one of the most lighthearted and slice-of-life-y kind of stories I've ever read. Female main character, interesting, again, really bouncy. There are a few like actiony moments in here, but very much it's just lighthearted, simple. Part of the title is a wholesome little RPG, so there you go. They kind of tell you what to expect. On September the 17th, it'll be the 4th book in the Paco Cosmos series. On September the 17th as well, it'll be the 6th book in the Bone Knight series. September the 19th, Immersion Online, book number 2. September 21st, Kingdom of Sails, World of Magic, book number 2. September 23rd, the 10th book in the Rise to Omniscience series called Soulstream. On September 27th, The Sleepless Ones, book number 8. On September 28th, Resurrection, Epiphany Realms, book number 1. Now, this one actually has changed release dates. I believe they pushed it up from August 28th to September 28th. So they pushed it back by a month. I'm not sure if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but it is what it is. On September 28th, Underverse, book number 6 will be out. On September 30th, it'll be Phineas and Jalil's Unsanctioned Adventure. On September the 30th, it'll be the Dungeon Core, Cat Core, book number 2. On September the 30th, Underdog, book number 7. September the 30th, it'll be Challenger's Call, book number 7. And this one also changes release date. So if it seems like it's coming out a little bit later than I thought, that's why. It has been changed to September the 30th. October the 1st, it'll be VR Hero, book number 4. October the 1st, it'll be Betrayal of the Arcani. I haven't heard of it, but still, it says it's LitRPG. On October the 1st, it'll be a new story from Vasily Mahenko called Idea, Starting Point, book number 1. October the 5th, the 3rd book in the Mad series, They Called Me Maddest. On October the 8th, The Weight of It All, book number 4, called Collapse. On October the 11th, Project Solar, book number 5. October the 14th, rather, In the System, book number 3. October the 15th, Legion's 5th Vault, The Divine Apostasy, book number 5. On October the 15th, Overtaken Online, book number 4. October the 15th as well, Cowboy Necromancer, book number 2 by Harlan Cooper. October the 19th, Drake Hunt Prince, rather. October 21st, Player Reaches the Top, book number 7. And October 26th, it'll be in NPC's Path, book number 5. And that's it. That's all the stuff I know it's coming out in the near future, all the way to the end of October. I scour Amazon for pre-order links, and this is what I come with. So if you're a publisher or you're an author who is looking to figure out a place in a release schedule, this is a great list to use for. And if you're a reader who just wants to plan out their spending, also a good place to look. So definitely check out our list. We, of course, have a written version of this stuff that's out recently, audiobooks out recently, and upcoming stuff on our website at littlepodcast.com in our recommendation section. So we have it listed there as well if you want to take a look at physically, or just check out the show notes for the podcast. Okay, on to stuff, onto new releases and reviews. Okay, first up is going to be Battleborne, book number 2, Wrack and Ruin, written by Dave Wilmarth. It is 392 pages, $4.99. It's available on Kindle Unlimited. Here is the author's description. Maximilian Storm has embraced his new life as a Battleborne. Reincarnated on a strange world with a powerful chimera body, he has gathered friends, made enemies, and developed wondrous new magic and physical abilities. He's even discovered that a couple of his men, Smitty and Dylan, have chosen to join him on this world. Max is on a mission to secure and expand his newly conquered kingdom, Stormhaven. But War Chief Anzalor wants his mine back. When he sends a small army of orcs to capture it, Max's party, along with his dwarven and orc allies, must help him defend his new territory. An epic quest is discovered, sending Max and his core party into the wilds to track down and retrieve a powerful artifact. New friends are discovered and new challenges met along the way. When Mac ventures off on his own, he discovers a lost territory and an ancient dwarven secret that may change the lives of everyone. A secret that also might end his own life and his reign. So there you go. Lots of things in this story. All the stuff in the novel description, completely accurate. This is an action RPG adventure, emphasis on the action. And it continues with our main character story. There's plenty of base building, city management, but there's still good action as well. The main character explores the world around a settlement, accrues resources, items, new citizens to fight, and he fights for those resources, as was kind of described in the description there. We're going to get some monster waste coming for his base, but he's also going to be exploring other locations and killing lots of stuff to secure those things he needs to expand. I in particular like the side story. There's a secondary side story, and I'm usually a big fan of these. But this one was so neat in the fact that it's another human that's transported to this world, just like the other Battleborne characters. Those on his side. This one is definitely probably not going to be. The two stories don't meet yet. I expect them to in the future at some point. But you definitely tell that this side story is set up for perhaps a series villain, or at least a series antagonist potentially. It's a story of a not so great person from our world, who is transported to this magical fantasy RPG world, and he doesn't do as well as the main character. He's very thiefy and assassinating and backstabby, and he does not flourish as well as our main character. And it's kind of interesting to see him even in this like small, again, it's not a big section of the story. It's at most 10%. But it's nice to see him kind of get his comeuppance as he's doing negative, bad things in this fantasy magical world. It also reflects that the larger world is not kind either. So it's an interesting opportunity to do a little bit of world building, but also develop this other character that's hopefully going to be tied into the main story at some point in the future. So I liked it a lot. Overall, good stuff. Easy read. It easily gets a score of 7.7 out of 10. That's Battleborne book number 2, Wrack and Ruin, with a score of 7.7 out of 10, which is really good. And next we have Wild Quest, The Good Guys book number 12, written by Eric Ugland. It is 426 pages, $4.99. It is available on Kindle Unlimited, and here's the author's description. Straight out of the west, or, somewhere through a gloom portal, and the thunderous hooves, but they're kind of like giant turtle hooves, if you can picture it, comes Montana Cogshell gun/sword slinger. Sure, he survived Fiend's Night with an all-out goblin war, but for his people in Cogshell to be truly safe, Montana needs to go out and find the source of all those crazy attacks. Along the way, Montana will be tested by feuding families, money-hungry miners, hookers with hearts of gold, and more than a few idiot tour guides. Turns out everything Montana's been through up until now wasn't hell, it was practice. There you go, nice and snappy novel description. I gotta say, I like it. This is a story where there's actually some progress for some quest lines and for some recent storylines that were developed. In the last book, as this isn't spoilers in the novel description, there was a major goblin raid and things seemed a little fishy with them being so well organized. And that entire, well, I should say a good portion of the source of that conflict is actually resolved within this next story. It's something that's resolved. But it was really like, oh, this is actually some related progress. A lot of the series is very much slice of life, with some town development, but a lot of times the main character does go off on his own and, do some action adventure stuff. And a recurring complaint as the series continues on is like, oh, this story doesn't mean anything, or there's no real progress on this. And I think that there's at least some definite and clear quest progression in this story. It's like a wild quest. Oh, okay, I kind of get it. The main character is there's a little front loaded town management stuff, and I'm like, okay, it doesn't really mean much in this entry, but it kind of has to be because the town is supposed to be developing, so we get that exists. But at the same time, for most of the story, the main character is not even in the town. He's actually whisked away by a magic portal, which is, again, not spoilery in the novel description. And he is he's focused on finding out the source of who's trying to attack Cogshell, and what the source of that whole thing is. And he does so. There's a lot of nice little action progressions here. It's almost it could almost be a little bit of a standalone story in that the main character, again, is essentially on his own for a good portion of it, in a new location, figuring out different circumstances, allies, enemies, what the situation is, what he wants to do about it. And it's just kind of nice to see that change of pace, but also just actual quests being given and resolved in the same story. So often in the series, there are quests that have been sitting around for 12 books. And I'm like, oh, okay, that's never going to be resolved. That's just a lost quest. And as a gamer, I'm like, yeah, that happens to me too. I'll play an MMO and I'll get quests and just not complete them ever. They'll just sit in my quest log forever. I'm like, okay, there's no real negative consequence to not completing them. But I do understand some readers' annoyance with them not being able. Their completion is people sometimes, and that's not always what the series is about. So for me, I had a good time, but again, I think I have modified expectations for this series, in that it's not always going to be super crunchy. The main character does action adventure stuff most of the time, and that stuff is really well done. There is also still like a kind of an LP gamer vibe, and that what the main character is capable of, and the town management stuff is definitely RPG stuff. But it's slice of life. I'm not taking it too seriously anymore. It's just like, oh, I'm just going to enjoy the story. And for those expectations, I'm like, okay, that's what I'm getting. And that's all I'm looking for, I guess, at this point. That's The Good Guys book number 12 with a score of 7.7 out of 10. I had a good time with it. And next up, we have War Core book number 1, Holding the Line, a LitRPG RTS dungeon core adventure written by Dean Hennigar. Okay, this is 260 pages, $4.99. It's available on Kindle Limited, and here's the author's description. Earth is under siege. For decades, the governments of our world have been fighting a desperate and secret battle to keep hordes of alien invaders away from our planet. When the Guardian of the United States falls, a new champion must be chosen. Sadly, the choice of a champion isn't ours to make, and the Galactic Conflict Authority selects a human, seemingly at random, to lead the United States of America's efforts to hold back the tide. Hugh Logan is in the middle of a teaching class when he is taken against his will and informed that he is now the newest member of Earth's defense against alien invasion. He must give up everything to become our champion. He must give up everything to prevent our destruction. He must become a war core. Okay, the novel itself has a kind of a unique premise to justify the RTS base building, the real-time strategy. Base building that aliens and humans are secretly fighting each other over parts of the universe. It almost sets Earth's leaders as the bad guys, as they basically murder the main character to get him to participate in as a war core. It's completely unneeded in my opinion, but it is, unique at least. The story doesn't really feel like a dungeon core novel at all, as it has more in common with a real-time strategy game, where the main character appears over a predetermined terrain and from a simple base gathering resources, builds units, and expands and fights. That's what the story is. Those are the game mechanics. There is RPG progression for the main character as a core, and also for the units he's building. So there is that type of like RTS progression system, and so that is RPG-ish. So it works in that respect. The actual dungeon core portion of this, I don't really think it is, because it's not saying one location. He's not like building defenses and having veterans come in, which is really more of what a dungeon core story is for me, at least. This story is again more of an RTS game, a real-time strategy kind of game system, and that's perfectly fine. I just expected it to be something slightly different because it does say dungeon core adventure, and that's definitely not what this is. And that's kind of where the problem lies a little bit for me, in that the fights for me were boring. Unfortunately, I don't enjoy watching real-time strategy game videos on the internet or watching like live matches. I'd rather play the game myself. And I like real-time strategy games, it's just that I like playing them, not watching them. For some reason, that's not entertaining for me. For other people, it absolutely is. Like, there's a huge fan base of like people who watch real-time strategy game videos and have a really good time with it. I know some of them, but for me, it just wasn't entertaining. So these fights very much reflect that kind of fighting. The main character is removed from any sense of danger. He's not actually there as a dungeon core, so even if like the dungeon is destroyed and he loses the battle, he's not in any danger. The side consequence of him losing a battle is that Earth loses a section of a galaxy or territory in their system that they're not using. It's an empty space. The long-term threat is that aliens are in our system and they might come for Earth at some point if we lose enough territory. That's really kind of a long-distance, vague premise to kind of set up in. So it is what it is. There are interesting strategies that the author provides, or the main character does, I should say, as they're playing, and it thought like, oh, that is an interesting thing that you're doing, or that's an interesting way to take advantage of the system, or the constraints, the rules that are agreed upon by the two sides as they fight. But for me, overall, it just wasn't engaging because a lot of the story revolves around, these fights, and they weren't engaging for me. And the side stories outside of those fights were like, Earth is kind of a jerk. Like the people who are forcing the main character into this situation murdered him without telling him to be a dead in your core, and his interactions with them aren't that engaging for me. So I'm like, okay, that's just me though. People who love watching resource gathering and sometimes dry descriptions of units being built may like the story more than me, and that's perfectly okay. But for me, it was not entertaining. It was boring for me. So that's War Core, book number 1, with a score of 5 out of 10. Boring for me, but hey, like I said, if you like real-time strategy games and watching them as videos or watching matches, you may enjoy this more than me. Next up, we have Expansion Pack, a LitRPG Anthology, the Rogue Dungeon series, written by James A. Hunter, Eden Hudson, and a lot more others. This is 194 pages, $4.99, a little bit expensive. It's available on Kindle Unlimited, and here's the author's description. Monsters rise, heroes fall, worlds collide, welcome to the dungeon. Or maybe it should be like a, welcome to the dungeon. Sounds better, actually. Hearthworld Online is a futuristic fantasy RPG brimming with monsters and magic and valiant heroes. But now it has become so much more than just a game. When Wrack van Graf, a magical freedom fighter from another world, suddenly finds himself in the body of a lowly dungeon troll, Hearthworld becomes the last bastion against an arcane tyrant from beyond the stars. The fates of 3 worlds hang in the balance as countless lives are caught up in the interdimensional war Wrack has inadvertently sparked. Who knew one little online troll could cause so much trouble? And again, there are 8 authors in the series. I'm not going to be reviewing all of them individually. I'll just give you like an overall recommendation or review for the series. There's a variety of short stories that introduce readers to several Shadow Alley authors, who's the publisher for the novel. They give backstory to popular characters that you may know from the Rogue Dungeon series, or create one-off spin-off characters and little worlds. But they are meant. Most anthologies exist not to essentially sell books. They exist to promote the series. They exist to promote the publishers and the authors in the series. Like, essentially, they're meant to be like, I like this little short story. Who's this author? What else have they done? That kind of thing, right? And this is exactly what it is. Each one of the stories is, one of them is so not particularly great, but most of them perfectly fine. I had various levels of enjoyment based upon like, how well I liked that particular character from the series, or if it was like an original story world and it did the work to kind of connect you to the characters while they're doing whatever they're doing. And one in particular actually really caught my fancy. It's called Candyland. It's a kind of candy playland themed dungeon within this world. And that's just enough backstory as a defunct G-rated location, abandoned once the game got a PG-13 rating, that it felt unique. The setting is very unique, and it had good dungeon core stuff, and it focused the wrong bad guys, but just antagonists, as the teenagers who decided to come back and farm this area, even though they're essentially like killing these cutesy little characters in a Candyland kind of thing, little dungeon world. And it was really, for me, entertaining to see the dungeon fight back without breaking like their G-rated programming. I was like, this took some effort to kind of figure out, and I appreciated the work and while sticking to the dungeon core kind of like theme there. Overall, the short stories range from like fine to good overall. And your enjoyment is kind of going to vary depending on the particular character or type of story there. So it's hard to review these. So I'll give it a score of 7.3 out of 10. That's a good review score. It does reflect that I thought one of them wasn't great, and most of them were like, okay. And one in particular was like, this is really nice. So that's as good as it gets. That's 7.3 out of 10. Expansion Pack, a LitRPG Anthology, The Rogue Dungeon. And next up we have Defiance of the Fall, book number 2, written by the first Defier, aka J.F. Brink. It is 638 pages. It is $5.99. Nice price point. It's available on Kindle Unlimited, and here's the author's description. Earth is crumbling from the pressure of not only their invaders, but from nature itself. Zack has managed to secure his island for the time being, growing into a true powerhouse through his endless struggles. However, becoming the strongest man in the world does not come without complications. A target has been placed on his back. Natives, aliens, and everyone has their eye on the throne. Even the system itself seems intent on forcing him into one desperate situation after another. Zack knows he is running against the clock on his mission to find his family, prompting him to set out to New Washington in search of answers. Meanwhile, powerful beings from a long-forgotten cult gather in the dark, their goal unknown. Okay, decent description. This is a great addition to the series. The story keeps up the action from book 1, but adds in more types of conflict as the main character and his faction finally meet up with the world government, a group of old world officials trying to create a dominating alliance. I really like the opportunity for different types of conflict and scheming created in the story. It was a nice break from a lot of the straight action scenes. The author used the more worldly alien characters in the main character's faction to instigate and give the main character, and I really enjoyed that fact that characters within his faction that they brought with them could be scheming, sneaky things, and use their superior knowledge system to overcome the schemes of the other groups that are trying to take advantage of him and the system and the world around them. And it's actually a nice little glimpse into, like, again, the larger world outside of the main character's island. So it's a nice little opportunity for world building as well. And you get a glimpse, I think, most of the major factions that are going to be in this series. At least, so it's nice. Plus the great action that still exists here. Game mechanics expand to include more town building and social quests. But there's all that action progression stuff that still exists in the story. And I there's a late story twist. I was like, oh, that's an interesting way to keep the main character progressing. And I was like, oh, that was a definitely interesting game mechanic choice. I'm curious to see where it goes. And if you've read the story, you know what I'm talking about, but it is something to look forward to if you haven't. Overall, story was still great. The expanded comics kept things from getting predictable, and I appreciate that. So it gets a score of 8 out of 10. That is a great review score from me for Defiance in the Fall, book number 2. Next up, we have Enter the System, Natural Laws Apocalypse, book number 1 by Tom Larcombe. It is 544 pages, $3.99. It's available on Kindle Unlimited, and here's the author's description. What do you do when the world as you know it changes dramatically with little notice? When the natural laws no longer apply in all cases, the only thing to explain why is a system that seems to have access to everyone in the world? That's an interesting way to ask a question. Mark's home from college on break, spending his time laughing about some of the crazy news stories he's found online and gaming. When a message appears in his line of sight blocking absolute everything, he nearly freaks out. The message warns that the world has been in a variant natural law beta test for a millennium and it's about to revert to the norms. Deciding that even if he's insane, he's not going to hurt anything to try to prepare. He settles in to do so. Despite the atrocious lack of the skill the system has with the English language, he manages to work his way through enough help files to get a clue of what's coming. After sharing discovery with a few friends, they all start to prepare together. Once the change begins, the small group races to create a safe zone or an area where monsters will not respawn or where they can gather on other survivors in an attempt to rescue as much of the new town as possible. Along the way, they discover that the new system can award classes that resemble those of the games the group has played, as well as magic for those capable of grasping it. With monsters spawning throughout the town, everyday animals being mutated into dangerous creatures, and a system that desperately needs English language lessons, they'll do the best to save as many of the local residents as they can. Okay, there we go. This is from the author of Light Online, and I really actually enjoyed that particular series. This one, less so. Not a bad story. It even labeled itself as a Natural Laws Apocalypse book. But with that kind of title, this is an RPG apocalypse story, which is perfectly fine. It's set in the modern world. It just wasn't anything particularly special. I felt like most of it was fairly standard. It has regular action, perfectly fine. An RPG system that gives loot, classes, base building, which becomes a really important thing as the story goes on. A lot of time I spent on that. And that's kind of it. That's all it really happens. There's a cycle of going out to fight monsters, to rescue people who are in various locations, bringing them back to the base, having some small time social conflicts perhaps, and leveling up, distributing stats and class stuff, and building the base up, expanding it, gathering resources with that, and then going back out to rescue more people. And it's really is just a cycle. So it's a very slice of life kind of story. There's no overarching arc to like, oh, we have a goal of saving the world by doing this thing, or an AI apocalypse is here and we have to defeat this one AI thing. Nope, none of that. It is slice of life, much like the other stories from this author. It's just it actually does a fairly good job of the RPG side of things. The main character has a couple unique classes where like, oh, this is some interesting synergy. You can tell the author's like, oh, I want to play with these kind of concepts. And he does so, and he expands, and there's plenty of class theorization there. Even the base building stuff is really nicely done. It's very thorough. It again becomes a more important part of the story than you think it is within the first 10 to 20% of the story. Honestly, probably too much time is spent in there for me. But the apocalypse side of things was super lacking. For an RPG apocalypse story, this is a pretty safe and bland kind of apocalypse. I'll be honest. If there was any kind of apocalypse I was going to be in, this would be the most survivable. I mean, just about everybody he rescues lives through it. There are occasional like, oh, we had some people die. But we, as readers, don't really get to see it. Like there's like one bad person in the story that ends up being killed early on. And there are a couple of other jerks. And that's kind of it. Like for an RPG apocalypse where everybody's pretty darn nice. And I'm like, oh, okay, that's definitely a distinctive choice. And I respect the author's right to do so. It just doesn't mesh with me of what an apocalypse is supposed to be. My reference point for that is like, oh, The Walking Dead or other apocalypse stories where humanity just the worst comes out of it because your regular resources like food, water, shelter, safety are gone. And so people are struggling and people are dying left and right. And it's much darker and that doesn't exist here. Like the main characters have some very early successes, even though they're just supposed to be regular teens and gamers and not particularly athletic. They do surprisingly well in the early part of the story, getting their base and their station set up. And I get on a story level why that has to happen so that they can expand the town building base elements of it. But it felt like it was a little bit easy for them. Like there wasn't really a ton of struggle. They struggle a little bit more as the story goes on. Like I said, as the story continues on, things expand and the story gets a little more balanced, but it never really gets dark. And that's something I definitely expect from anything called an apocalypse of any kind. So for me, not a bad story, just nothing too surprising. If you're a big fan of base building, I think you'll probably like this a lot more. Like I like base building, I do. It's just that I'd say more than half the story is, I want to build this thing and I got to gather these resources and what should I do with this and expanding things. And it's a good portion of the story. And so if you're really into that, you'll really enjoy this. I'm not into it as much as that. I definitely prefer other types of development, like the main characters classes and more action adventure stuff. So it is what it is. Gets a score of 7.2 out of 10, which again, good score. It's not a negative score in any way, shape, or form. It's just, it's on the lesser side of my enjoyment. So that's Enter the System, Natural Laws of Apocalypse, book number 1, with a score of 7.2 out of 10. And next is going to be Dungeon House. This is a online webcomic or manhwa. It is 23 chapters. It is currently free. It's a fan translation. There's no official English publisher of this at all. And here's the description. One day, my house got connected to a dungeon. It's dangerous outside because of the monsters, but in order to survive, I have to clear the dungeon within the time limit. I don't want to die. I want to survive. Kim Hoon-byuk has to try and clear the dungeon by himself now that all the other explorers have died. Having awakened his power, he starts taming monsters. With the skeletons Chris, Kai, and Kessel, who have regained their memories, our protagonist's life-risking adventure to clear the dungeon starts now. Yeah, and that's a very good description of like the first couple chapters in this story. This is a dungeon dive manhwa. It has the main character again trapped in his apartment, not able to leave to go out to the outside world until he or somebody else clears the dungeon that has been connected to his house. And that's the fundamental premise of the story. He cannot leave. He cannot call for help until this dungeon is cleared. And this is like my spoiler. Him and 50 other people are connected to this dungeon, and he slowly watches and he tries out the dungeon first, and he sees that it's super dangerous and he almost dies. And so he huddles in his room, waiting for somebody else to clear it. And slowly that 50 number starts dropping and dropping and dropping until he's just the one last person. And he forces himself to leave because otherwise he's going to die. The quest description is like, if you don't clear this by the time limit allotted, you're just going to die automatically. And I liked that forced premise of making him go new, because otherwise him and I think most people would rather just somebody rescue them. They'd rather not take the risk of really fighting for your life against goblins and skeletons and other monsters that are really trying to kill you in mass. It's a reasonable thought to do that. So the story does set up a very interesting motivation to make him do this despite his not really wanting to. And I liked the aspect of him overcoming that and becoming powerful and figuring out the system and ways to take advantage of certain mechanics and powers and magic systems and things to become powerful, and figuring out other things like the system store and how to take advantage of that to get resources to buy other things and equipment and things and magic spells. And it's kind of neat. I like the development system. I don't want to get too spoily because that's part of the fun. It is very much a slice of life story. There's not there's no plot to save the world or anything. It really is just like him dungeon diving and becoming more powerful and figuring out exploits to do well. And I liked it. He was a smart character, uses the mechanics very well, and I enjoyed that. Overall, good stuff. I read the entire 23 chapters in a single day. So it's good for me. He gets a score of 7.4 out of 10. That's Dungeon House with a score of 7.4 out of 10. That's a solid, good review score. Okay, next up. That's it. We're done. There is no next up. That's the whole point. The show is finished. We're done. Thank you very much for listening, for watching. Remember, you can always follow the podcast to see when the latest episodes come out. On Facebook at the LitRPG Podcast there, Twitter, YouTube, Patreon, where you can support the podcast. And at our website at LitRPGpodcast.com, where you can see all the thousands of reviews we have for LitRPG in a searchable database. You can find more stories that you may like. You can also listen to us on Spotify and Audible on a regular basis whenever we release the podcast. We also have links in the show notes for other LitRPG pages where you can talk to your favorite authors and other readers and ask for suggestions and recommendations. Great locations to talk to the community and find other people like yourself who love LitRPG. Remember, if you enjoyed the podcast and want to support us in any way, shape, or form, you can find out all the ways to do so at litrpgpodcast.com/support. Until then, thanks, so we can talk again. Thanks for listening, for hanging out with me and letting me talk about this genre that I love, LitRPG. And until we can do so again, remember to go read some LitRPG. Goodbye, everybody.